Hello everyone, I'm Scott Lowe from IGN, coming from Gamescom. I'm sitting alongside the talented Mark Cerny, architect of the PS4, to talk about that very subject. Thank you for talking with me.
Well, thank you for having me.
So obviously, the question, there's a million questions on people's minds about how the PS4 came to be. You spoke to great lengths at Game Lab, and hopefully I won't make you rehash too much, but could you tell us a little bit more about your role and kind of expand upon that, because it's unlike anything this industry's really kind of seen before.
So we took a very different approach with the hardware design. We wanted to make something that the game creators could really use very easily. With something where they could focus on really the sort of game they wanted to create and not focus as much as the hardware minutia. So the first part of the hardware design process was going out and talking to over 30 developers about what sort of feature set they'd like to see in a next generation hardware. And the results were not all what I expected them to be. For one thing, the number one requested feature was unified memory. Apparently, as a developer, unified memory cuts a lot off of your development time. And that may have to do with the number of platforms they have to support. First party, that wasn't as important an issue for them, but for third party, that was their number one issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I think a lot of just recently there was some controversy as to how much of that resource that developers would have access to, and it seems like you guys are pretty flexible in terms of how extensively what could be allotted to certain functions in OS and over time could evolve.
Over time, it's all definitely going to evolve. Right now we're trying to take a fairly straightforward approach, launch with that, and then we'll figure out where we want to go from there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the PlayStation 3 that existed when it launched, as opposed to how it exists today, is a very different creature. Like an evolution of software and even the hardware itself. One of the things that jumps out at me is the PlayStation 4 as it exists right now is very, very exciting. But where do you see it going in the future? The 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. Obviously, you've developed a very flexible platform, but where do you really see the kind of functionality and the evolution going?
So what we have in the platform is a supercharged PC architecture. We've got a PC CPU, we have a highly enhanced PC GPU. What the supercharged nature is referring to is the fact it's unified memory. So all the memory is at the same speed and can be allocated freely between graphics or whatever the CPU wants to be using. And also we've gone in and done a lot of customizations to the GPU. And the hardware is quite powerful as well. We set our target at 10 times the PlayStation 3. What we're seeing for the launch titles is pretty straightforward usage of the hardware. So the teams haven't had time to really dig in. Most of the enhancements that we put into the GPU are not being used in those titles. And what we're going to see in years 2, 3, and 4 is not only do the teams become more familiar with the hardware in general and optimize their engine, but we'll also see them dig into those features and see, for example, just how far they can use, say, for example, asynchronous compute in enhancing the interactivity of their worlds.
Yeah, and obviously, AMD has kind of been your established partner on this, and NVIDIA's come out and said that there was lucrative reasons as to why they weren't as your guys' partner for it. What was specifically about? Was there any kind of specific targeting of AMD and their products, or in terms of what they're capable of, that really kind of attracted you guys for the PS4?
So part of that is technology, but it's technology timing, because somebody might have the best tech in the world, but if it doesn't ship the year that you need it to ship, you can't use it. And then there are huge business side issues as well. It has to be a relationship where everybody involved is happy with it financially. And really the decision to go with AMD came out of all of those factors put together.
Yeah, and obviously, the competition is very much trumping the idea of the potential for cloud computing and their version of kind of a unified cloud platform and calling to that. Obviously the emphasis of PlayStation 4 is much larger on the what's in the box, but there obviously cloud services are playing their role. Will we see kind of cloud become a larger part of that platform, and in what capacity?
I think we're all right now feeling out what cloud can do. I mean, we know cloud is very good for matchmaking. It's not clear today what cloud can bring us beyond that. I mean, I have seen, for example, research projects done and even published games done where, for example, physics was distributed in the cloud. But the difficulties we run into are, is it adding something significant to the experience? And then what do you do if whoever it is not connected to the cloud when they're playing the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, connectivity and broadband obviously varies drastically between regions and where you're located, and of course, what if you just don't have it connected? And obviously, that was a big benefit, part of the strategy at E3. Speaking of, now that the competition has kind of changed a lot of the really distinguishing factors of in terms of how they really varied in terms of their strategy with online and the motion gaming and whatnot. Where do you see the PlayStation 4 really kind of still standing out? Is it that raw power element, or is it just what is to you the most distinguishing factor?
Well, I think that the performance of the hardware is big. I think that people will really appreciate the level of graphics and the interactivity, the worlds that will be in the PlayStation 4 titles. But I also, the software lineup is very important, and I'm very proud of the almost 3 dozen title lineup that will be available at launch on PlayStation 4.
Yeah. And speaking of the hardware itself, I mean, obviously you're not a thermal engineer, but I think so many people, and for me especially, I just cannot fathom how you've managed to cram so much into such a tiny compartment, with integrated power supply all right then and there, and minimal ventilation in terms of just the not having fans everywhere.
Well, I mean, that is simply a consequence of the power consumption of the hardware being much less than the PlayStation 3. So the PlayStation 3, we had 2 very large custom chips in it. We had the Cell and we had the RSX. And in the case of PlayStation 4, we just have 1 chip, and consequently, we have reduced the power enough that the weight of the console is only about half of what it was for PlayStation 3.
Yeah, it's I saw it firsthand. I think Jack Tretton, when he came over for our series up at noon, they brought the prototype, and I just when you see it in photos, you really don't get a sense of scale, but it is so significantly smaller. It's mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, definitely when you pick up the console, but you're not feeling that weight. It's not the custom chips.
Yeah.
It's the power supply. It's the fans. It's all the metal that they have to put into the console.
Of course. And so, speaking of the larger, kind of Sony ecosystem, obviously causes really kind of bringing a lot of the various arms together: entertainment, mobile, electronics, and of course gaming and interactive. What kind of consideration was really kind of given to all of those larger efforts? Did you work alongside some of the mobile teams and the electronics teams to kind of figure out the long-term kind of integration of the PlayStation brand and software and hardware with that kind of larger structure?
Well, of course, we're always looking for synergies within the larger Sony Corp world. PlayStation 4 has been fairly game-focused, though, throughout its development. I mean, we understand that people appreciate the larger world of services that are offered, but we also understand that they are coming to PlayStation 4 because they want to play games.
And then, where does Vita tie into this? Obviously, they're 2 very separate products, and obviously you're focused on PS4. But it's at this point, the Vita seems to be just getting a huge boost in terms of interest because of its integration with PlayStation 4. Do you think that because it's now based on an ARM-based system, whereas the PlayStation 4 is x86, is it going to be more challenging to have native Vita experiences, based on PlayStation 4 titles as a result?
Well, we're definitely continuing to reach out to all of the publishers with regards to Vita and titles on Vita. I do agree that the architecture on the PlayStation 4 is something that is quicker to bring titles to. I mean, a lot of that is also performance on PlayStation 4 because there is so much performance there. It's very natural to bring something over. With Vita, the development tends to be much more targeted. The very good news right now on Vita is that there are some wonderful games that have come out recently in Japan, and the sales are really picking up on the platform.
Absolutely, and then obviously with the Killzone Mercenary and kind of a lot of these like longer, like kind of native experiences, but then the remote play element, I think from a software side, even as a developer on the NAC side, and of course, architect on the PlayStation 4, I think there's still a lot of apprehension or confusion about like how those experiences will really extend. Like, is there a lot of legwork for developers to make their games remote play enabled? And
remote play should be very easy to put together on Vita. The whole compression of video and decompression of the video and communication is all handled by the operating system. So as a developer, really all you need to do is focus on making a customized control scheme where you're mapping the DualShock 4 controls onto the controls of the Vita. So if you're using both shoulder buttons, you need to figure out, are you using maybe the top of the back touch, and if the touch pad is being used, where do you put that into the interface? But I mean, that's a couple weeks of work for a designer, and I really think it should be quite easy to get remote play to work on the titles.
Yeah. Of course, and then switching gears a little bit to motion and kind of the integration of the light bar on the controller and move. The decision to not have the camera baked in to the bundle of the box, and as well as kind of leaving it as its own separate thing. How do you see kind of motion evolving as an integral part of this platform, and especially when you're looking at stuff like Playroom, where it's like pre-installed on the system, but then again the camera's not involved, so you can't really use it. Like, so how do you?
Well, I think that the game players are free to figure out what excites them, and the publishers are free to figure out what sort of titles that they would like to create, and we are an enabler for all of that. We have a camera that integrates very nicely with the DualShock controller, and to the extent that teams are interested in using that, we've set it up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've kind of encountered quite a bit is when you're looking at, much like I was saying, seeing the box in photographs and then seeing it in person is very much different. I feel like a lot of people see the graphical fidelity increases of the PlayStation 4 on compressed videos in a very small window, and it may be hard to kind of discern like that kind of benefit of upgrading to next gen. Aside from just this sheer visual fidelity, what would you say is like the most like kind of standout, maybe perhaps least publicized benefits of the PlayStation 4?
So the performance is really getting you two things. It's getting the graphics, but it's also getting the interactivity of the world, because that takes a tremendous amount of processing power as well. And I think that is where we have the most to look forward to in the couple of years after launch, is after those launch titles come out and people are really digging into the system. Now, not every game needs to be Red Faction, but how do we leverage that performance to make it a world that truly is interactive?
And then switching gears to the PlayStation 4 controller, obviously, you had some involvement. It wasn't your primary focus, as I understand it, but obviously the big noted improvements are, of course, centered towards first-person shooters and action titles, specifically with regards to the triggers. What other kind of what kind of feedback did you guys gather? Was it purely from the development community? Was it like users? Was it playtesting?
So one thing we did was we looked at pretty much any idea we had in terms of what we could put on the controller, previous interview I mentioned galvanic skin response just because I thought that nobody would really miss having that on the controller. But when we looked at just about anything you could think of for it, the first-person shooter, though, that was a very focused project. We have had a lot of feedback that our controllers have been less than ideal, and we wanted to make sure that with DualShock 4 that we had something that would satisfy pretty much anybody this time around. So we made a lot of different prototypes, and then we reached out to, and unfortunately I can't say the names, some of the biggest FPS creators in the business, and we sent them prototypes and we got their feedback, and we iterated and customized until we had something that they were happy with.
Of course. And then obviously one of the kind of least kind of seen elements is obviously we've seen social and some of the brief glimpses of the UI. How involved were you in that process as far as like kind of crafting the look and feel and the interactivity of the interface itself?
So the look and feel of the interface was its own project, done with our design center with a lot of iteration of designs where we'd make it and we'd see if people really were comfortable. And we ended up redoing the interface as part of that process. But the core feature set that came out of a very broad working group that I was a member of that was game people, technology people, people from other groups within Sony even.
So obviously NAC is now like a big part of your focus. Where will your role kind of evolve now? Like once the PlayStation 4 ships and you move on to other maybe software projects, will you still be involved, with the hardware platform and kind of shaping the evolution over time with that?
Well, I mean, even when a platform ships, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and certainly on the software side, we will be working on making it an even more, I guess, integrated and powerful system. But I think most of my time will go back to games once we hit launch. I was a creative director on NAC for the first time, and it was a lot of fun. And I'm really thinking that that's where I'll be heading next year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I appreciate it, and hope you have a great Gamescom.
Thank you for having me.